Hello, I'm Donald Macaulay and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we talk to the key opinion leaders around the world. Today we're in New Zealand and I'm talking to Brian McAvoy, someone whose name I've been familiar with all my life because he's one of the leading world's academics in primary care. Now, Brian, I say, is in New Zealand, but I don't think that's always been the case. You must be the most travelled academic. Tell me a little about your whole life's journey, Brian.
Well, I guess it's been one of the wonderful privileges of being a GP and being a medical practitioner that you have a chance to travel. And back in the midst of time, when I was a student at Glasgow University, it was a 6-year course there. But you only had 9 months of teaching. And if you passed your exams, you had 3 months free every year. And some folk just took that as a holiday. But there was always the opportunity to go and work overseas, to do a clerkship. If you could scrape together enough money to get a fare to go, you could go anywhere. And so I had opportunities every year to go to America, South Africa, Poland, Yugoslavia. And it was a wonderful opportunity to travel and work in another country. And then after I had graduated and done my training, things just happened. I mean, serendipity's been a large part of it. The opportunities came up and had a chance to go to Canada and then to New Zealand and Australia, and just enjoyed the diversity over the years.
Let me bring you back to Canada because you really were a pathfinder, because you went to McMaster before evidence-based medicine became so trendy.
Yes, I mean it was a wonderful opportunity, and again it was just one of these things. After I had finished the pilot training scheme in Glasgow, somebody had mentioned to me, the teaching now in general practice, which was just beginning to come in UK, was really quite exciting. And there was this place called McMaster, and I should find out a bit more about it. So I just sent a letter off saying, I'd heard about this and I was quite interested in what they were doing. What was there a chance of perhaps coming there? And I got a letter back saying, yes, sure, come, but send us your objectives and we'll organise a programme for you. I nearly fell over at that. I mean, all this idea of establishing objectives. So they weren't going to tell me what I was going to do. Suddenly it was back to me to identify what I wanted to do and how I would do it. And below me, they said, yes, we can give you a teaching fellowship. And, that was just an eye-opener. It was a wonderful, it ended up 15 months I was over there. And it was just incredible. It really was the sort of engine of academic general practice at that time in the mid-70s.
Well, then, if I remember correctly, you came back to Leicester. And at that time, Leicester was one of the leading postgraduate centres for teaching of general practice in the nascent vocational training schemes.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, it was the newest medical school in Europe at that time. And Marshall Marinka had just been appointed as the foundation professor there. And again, with life's rich tapestry, in order to fund the fare to go to Canada and spend a year plus in Canada, I had to get some money together. And I had undertaken a locum in general practice down in Northamptonshire before we went. My wife and I went down there. We saw this advert for a little rural dispensing practice in Northamptonshire for a couple of weeks. And we thought, well, that would be fun to do. And also we can get some money for a trip. And it just turned out that the two doctors who were working there were growing the practice. They were looking for a new partner in the next year or so. And it just sort of gelled. And they said, well, when you come back from McMaster, maybe you want to come and work here. So that transpired and I started work there. And I got out the atlas and looked to see where the nearest medical school was, but again, to find out if there was any chance of getting involved in teaching. And Byfield, where the practice was was exactly halfway between Leicester and Oxford. Oxford obviously is a very well-established university, but general practice really didn't feature very much there. And the new setup that Marshall Marinka had begun was quite attractive. And I dropped him a line, and he said, well, again, when you come back from McMaster, I'm sure we'll be able to find some part-time work here. And so I started. It was a great opportunity because Marshall was open to all sorts of ideas, and we were able to bring back some of the things we learned at McMaster about simulated patients, problem-based learning, self-directed learning, evidence-based practice, and we're able to start putting it into practice with the students there. So it was enormously exciting.
What an incredible grounding in really innovative general practice. That was so far ahead of its time. So then where did the journey take you next?
Well, it took me to New Zealand because I was in the practice there for 7 years and became senior lecturer and was loving it and getting into research. And by then, other centres in UK were developing departments of general practice, and the whole discipline was growing. And a letter popped through the letterbox saying that there was a foundation chair being established in Auckland in New Zealand, and would I be interested in applying? And that transpired again serendipitously, because when we'd come back from McMaster to UK in 1977, we decided we would, rather than go straight back across the Atlantic to UK, we would go round the world the long way and have a month visiting different countries. And we had a week in New Zealand, and we had got contacts from McMaster who had been there. And so we visited several general practices and saw all round New Zealand in a week. And that had established a link there. And that's, I think, why I got sent the letter saying, was I interested? So again, I threw my hat into the ring and ended up coming out to help set up a new department of general practice in Auckland Medical School. And that again was a wonderful opportunity, and provided a link with my old friend Campbell Murdoch. And he had just been appointed 3 years earlier as the foundation professor in Dunedin in the South Island. And he actually taught me surgery in Glasgow when I was a student there. And the wonderful story around that is that I had come out for a formal interview with the university committee and everything. It was quite a bit of competition, but I did get appointed. And then to my dismay, somebody sent me a cutting from the New Zealand Doctor fortnightly newspaper all GPs got. So the headline was, "The Glasgow Mafia had come to New Zealand." And so it was a slightly prickly entry to the world of general practice, having that double whammy of being seen as coming from the NHS, which was the enemy of a lot of the GPs who'd escaped in the earlier years from UK to come to New Zealand. And then this possible conspiracy of appointing me and Campbell.
That was quite an introduction. So then these were the early days of publishing in general practice. And of course, it was a combination when people worked a clinical job and an academic job. So just give us a little flavour of the difficulties of balancing those things at that time.
Well, it was certainly an unusual thing to be doing. And one of the tensions, the few tensions I had in that first practice I worked in Byfield when I was doing a day a week up at Leicester, was there were only 3 of us in the practice. It was a rural dispensing practice. We had 5,600 patients between the 3 of us, and we did all the on-call, all the obstetrics, all the palliative care. And my middle partner wasn't over supportive of me having a day a week at university. He used to say it was my day off from the practice, where I'd drive 40 miles up and down the M1, have a whole day teaching and then come back to be on call. But, when I'd come back and he'd hand over to me at 6 o'clock, he'd say, how was your day off today? And I had the encouragement of the other part-time GPs in the department and Marshall, who was an incredible enthusiast and mentor. And he encouraged the starting to do some research, and that's where having a practice base and patients and just collecting data and starting to dip my toe in the world of research was encouraged.
So you're in New Zealand now, but clearly you must have had itchy feet because you've really traveled way beyond that. So tell us a little bit about where you went and sort of the aims and objectives and the achievements in these different locations.
Well, again, it was an extension of what I'd seen as a student. Opportunities came along when you could go and work in another country, and you see a country from a very different perspective when you're there working rather than there as a tourist. And when I'd been both in Newcastle and in Auckland, I had the opportunity to do visiting professorships and external examining at places like Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. I mean, I had an amazing week in Saudi Arabia as external examiner there, which was an eye opener. That was in the early 90s.
Now, you've written a book about your experiences, and there are very many and fascinating angles to it. But tell me, what was the experience of writing the book like?
Well, it was great fun, actually, because it was an opportunity to sort of sit down and reflect on things. It was just after I had retired, and I had threatened to write a non-academic book at some point. I always had this great idea that I could write something that was non-academic. But of course, I had the perfect excuse of the work never to do it. But once I was retired, I was able to do that. And I just thought the theme through the book is entitled "The Last, the Least, the Lonely, and the Lost," which really epitomizes the sort of patients that I've been involved with over the years in marginalised groups, practices in inner city and some rural and remote areas where really patients are leading very difficult lives. And as the story unfolded for myself, somebody pointed out, I certainly joined the ranks of them at various stages in my life as well. But it just gave me a chance to look at general practice and how things had changed so much over nearly 50 years of clinical practice, and had a chance to offer some reflections on what has changed and what hasn't changed. And I'm pleased to be retired now, but the book's given me an opportunity to spread the word about general practice and what a wonderful vocation it is. But there are all sorts of issues around which weren't there when I started off.
I'm very glad you described that, because I was very taken by the title of the book, which describes a lot of the difficulties and sadness and troubles that people have, that the patients have, that we share with them. Reflecting on those 50 years in practice, let me ask you a final question, and that would be, what would your advice be to the young GPs setting off on an academic career today?
Go with gusto. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's such an amazing discipline where you have the chance to work with all sorts of people at every stage of their life. I mean, you're so privileged that you are working with people and you are able to share their thoughts, their aspirations, their fears. You get an opportunity to go into their homes, to be present for all sorts of events throughout their lifetime and their families' lifetimes, births, deaths, all sorts of experiences. And you're very privileged to be able to do that. and you also have the opportunity of ongoing experience with individuals and with families. So it's a unique discipline within medicine, and huge challenges, but also huge rewards. So be prepared to work hard, be prepared to learn lots of things. There are quite a few stories in the book about things I learned, which certainly I had not been taught about in medical school. I have still vivid memories of the first house call I ever made. The pilot training scheme in Glasgow enabled you to work in a practice for a year, and you sat in with the GP at first, and then he sat in with you for a while, and then when it was felt you were capable enough, you were allowed to go off on your own for the first house call. And mine was to a house in the unfortunately named Nitz Hill estate, which was one of the slum estates around Glasgow, where life was very hard for a lot of people. This was in the early 1970s. And when I went there, I arrived at the house, and there was this little boy, 7 or 8 year old, sitting in bed covered in spots, and the parents ushered me through to the bedroom, and I opened my brand new medical bag and got my stethoscope, took a thorough history from the parents, then examined the little boy very carefully: ears, nose, throat, chest, heart, temperature, and was confident that he had measles. And so I put my stethoscope away. By this time, most of the extended family had arrived, and we're all peering round the door into the bedroom to see what the doctor was up to. And so I stood up and started walking across the room to tell them the diagnosis and what needed to be done. And I noticed there was something under my foot. And I looked down, and it was a piece of bread with jam on it that had been under the bed and had stuck to the sole of my shoe. So I decided it's probably better to just ignore it. And I sort of went across the room walking in my heel, and then spoke to the parents and got out of the house, and they was able to scrape it off on the pavement. But you know, it was one of those moments that remain with you for the rest of your life.
That's certainly the essence of general practice, those particularly special moments, memorable moments that really you don't really learn about in medical school. Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's been a privilege, because what you don't realize that as I trailed through my academic career, I was very aware of your huge contribution to our discipline. Brian, thank you very much indeed. It's been wonderful chatting to you.